732 cases in Victoria, a record number dead, over 300 in hospital tonight and 34 of those in intensive care. What an indictment for an island continent such as ours that supposedly, with its closed national borders, had managed this virus down into suppression. The reality tonight, we know, is that the vast bulk of cases in Victoria are cases where officials have no idea where the person caught it from. We know test results are still taking as long as 9 days to come in. We know contact tracing, the whole system is basically getting to the point of collapsing under the weight of these numbers. And we know that messages people are getting from the Victorian Health Department are inconsistent and often contradictory. We know all of this. But listening to the Premier today, honestly, I thought to myself, how bloody seriously are we even taking these numbers anymore?
Now, I don't want this to be seen as criticism or blame, but I'm obliged to point out that there were a number of people who were not home. They will be referred to Victoria Police. There were also a number of other people who, when there was a discussion, the person that the ADF and the Health Department as a joint team were looking for, the person who has a confirmed diagnosis having coronavirus, they've got a positive test, they weren't home, but a family member was, and the family member helpfully pointed out that that person, a positive coronavirus case, was in fact at work. And on the other end of the spectrum, and I'll come back to work in a moment, on the other end of the spectrum there were a number of people who needed scripts filled, a number of people who were running very low on some of the basic household items, everything from some groceries, toilet paper, things of that nature. We, because of that visit, we've been able to source all of those things for those people.
That is the problem right there. People who have tested positive have been told they must stay home and self-isolate, being caught out by officials for breaking the rules. And the Premier says, I don't want to sound critical. For God's sake, Daniel Andrews, lead. You say you don't want to sound critical. We want you to be critical. Those of us in lockdown, we want you to throw the book at these idiots who think it's okay to go out and about, go to work, go wherever, knowing that they're positive. We want you to be critical. I tell you, if it was me, anyone not at home when the police knock on the door, they would be found immediately and relocated to hotel-based quarantine. No second chance, no excuse, that's it. The same arrangements we use for anyone coming from overseas, although run by the police this time, not your dodgy bouncers. We all know the rules. We're 7 or so months into this, and this idea today that rather than punish them, the Premier admits he's now using the ADF, the military, to run around and get groceries in order to keep them at home, just shows what a farce this whole system has begun. Honestly, we've now got over 5,300 active cases of this virus, 900 of them in vulnerable aged care homes, yet the Premier is using the army for grocery shopping? Is that it? And what about the new announcements today for those living in regional Victoria? You must wear a mask. No issue with that. Most of my family, in fact, live in country Victoria. They've been saying for weeks, bring in the mask rule. Help us all avoid the mess that Melbourne's in. The other changes, well, from now on, you can't have any visitors in your home in regional Victoria. But in yet another example of absurd inconsistency, the pubs are still open, so are the restaurants and the cafes. So you go to the pub with your mates, you just can't have them over for dinner. It just doesn't make sense. After all, the same virus in country Victoria is the same virus we've got in Melbourne, so why the inconsistent rules? Indeed, in the regional town of Colac, the COVID infection rate is 3 times the infection rate we're seeing in some of the worst hotspots in Melbourne. But the pubs are open. Now, to the Premier's credit, despite the worst days so far and the prospect of much worse days to come, particularly for those that have someone they love in aged care, he at least fronted the media. But in many respects, That's been his ongoing problem here, and a feature of the time of Daniel Andrews as Premier, a master of the politics and the game of media spin, but not on top of the detail, not on top of the policy, the implementation, or the results. It would be so much easier to believe that the Andrews government was finally coming to grips with this pandemic if each day when he fronted the media, he was actually able to detail exactly how the government is improving its performance, how it's getting more defence personnel out on the ground doing real things, not grocery shopping, explaining the extra infection control procedures he's put in place in nursing homes, elaborating how much better prepared our hospitals might be. That instead of telling us how many tests he's done, how about how long people wait for the results of those tests and what he's doing to improve tracing? Instead of the pious little sermons about how Victorians are doing the wrong thing and need to lift their game, as if the Victorian government doesn't need to clean up its own act. I mean, say what you like about Gladys Berejiklian in and around Ruby Princess a few months ago, but within a couple of days of that disaster becoming apparent, she pushed the health minister to one side, she brought in the police commissioner and put him in charge of arrivals and set up a full and properly powered judicial inquiry. If you ever wanted an argument against fixed election terms, this is it. Because Victorians are stuck with this mob until November 2022. At this rate, we'll probably still be in lockdown in Victoria. I mean, if this was a private company with a record like this, the receivers would have been sent in. The senior managers, all these ministers, they'd have been sacked, and the CEO, the Premier, would be facing an industrial manslaughter charge. All we can hope for in Victoria now is that tomorrow is better than today, and that in itself is an indictment.